What's going on, y'all? It's your boy Fox here, and this time doing something a little bit different. So as you probably know, the preseason for Season 11 of League of Legends dropped, and after doing playtesting and research and extensive theory crafting, I've come up with what I feel like are the best builds in general for Yasuo and Yone. So I'm gonna give you two builds, and I'm gonna give like context on them, and then we'll go like much more in depth. I'll be explaining like my reasoning behind everything. So first of all, this is gonna be super scuff. I've actually voiced my like thoughts on Twitter earlier, and then I just was like, hey, why not do a video on this? So I'm just gonna like go. I have no script, nothing. I'm just going by my like Twitter post and that thread, and we'll be talking over stuff there. So like, I say this is for Yasuo, but I claim here like somewhere around here. But I do like clarify that everything I've said thus far can be applied to Yone. They do have some differences for the builds and for what you want to prioritize, but in general they will act like similarly. First of all, like for some context, if you don't know about the preseason changes, on top of items, they also, I mean, it's related to items. Yasuo and Yone now get half a point of bonus AD for each % of excess critical chance. And since it all like complete items that give you crit give you 20%, so that'll mean they will be generally go for 120%. But there are some like outliers and different scenarios, and we'll be going over them. But just keep that in mind. So the first build, which is like super similar to the previous build in terms of functionality and how it works, is this one. And this one is in general, I think, the better one. But as we will see a bit later on, when we need flexibility in our build for different matchups and stuff, we will have to go for different stuff. I just did it in practice tool. So the first one will be, like, this will be the order. Obviously you always want to go for berserkers first, but after that you actually don't go for your mythic first, you go for PD first, and then for your shield bow, and then for IE. The reason for this is just PD gives you so much attack speed, and although you do lose the shield which you previously had from PD, you don't have it anymore. I can actually show you here. We can hop into practice tool real quickly so I can also explain more about these items. But the shield bow basically serves as the old PD, but additionally it gives you lifesteal. So it's generally the best item to go for when you're picking mythics on Yasuo or Yone. But as you will see a bit later, there is a scenario, or a few scenarios actually, where you do want a different mythic. And obviously, like, now it's preseason, go ahead and try out stuff, see what works for you, see what you like the best, because that's what preseason is all about. But in general, what the core builds will be looking like is, like, the first one, as I said, you will get berserkers first, then you will get PD. This is the new changed PD. The stats are the same, but instead of having the lifeline shield like you did before, you now have spectral vaults, which means you get ghosting, so you ignore unit collision. Obviously it doesn't matter how Yasuo, since you have your dashes. And then you get move speed, and then if you attack 5 times, you also get 40% attack speed for that duration, which is pretty nice. So it's a good item. I do think still, like, the old one with the shield was better in general, because now you obviously have no defensive capabilities in this item, but it's still fine. And then the next one in your build will be the Immortal Shield Bow. So The biggest reason why we don't go for this first is, as you see here, it's 15% attack speed, where Phantom Dance is 40%. So this is to get the most usage out of your Q. So I invite you to actually try out this first as well, but I do think in general you should go for PD first. And then it's Mythic Passive, which, if you don't know, you can only buy one Mythic item per champion, and the Mythic item guarantees all of your other legendary items, and legendaries being basically all complete items, like finished ones, apart from boots. Grant them a sort of this passive which gives them more stats. So this is basically, it's just the old Lifeline Shield, stronger, but it also gives you lifesteal. And then the Mythic Passive gives you 80 and health. So this is generally what you want to go for second. And then third, obviously, I also changed a bit. So instead of it just making your crits do more damage, you actually gain crit damage per crit chance. And it doesn't say it here, but just like Yasuo and Yone had weaker crits with the old IE, this also gives them less damage, since they still do to reduce critical damage. But this is generally what your build looks like. And the reason we go for this is, with these two items at level 9, you also already have almost your cooldown for Q capped out. Then when you go for here, all you have to do is you get a dagger and you max it out, and then you just finish the build. So you're capped on QCEDR already, and then you just get IE. And then the two other slots we will talk about later when we talk about the other build as well. But this is generally the order you want to go for, and this is, I'd say, the generalist build and the build that you usually want to go for. And then for the other one, we have this one. If I could change my scene. Actually, it's probably actually easier to do it this way. But the other one, we will actually go for a different mythic, which also makes our build path different. So once again, you want to go obviously for Berserkers first. But second, we will go for Kraken Slayer, which is a new mythic as well. And what Kraken Slayer does, it's 80, it's attack speed, it's the most attack speed out of all the crit mythics. You can ignore Gale Force, you never want to go for this. Unless you obviously want to give it a try, then go ahead. It gives the most attack speed out of all the mythics, and every third attack deals bonus true damage. Obviously really good, since your Qs can apply this as well on both Yasuo and Yone. And the mythic passive for this, which is really important, is that you get 10% attack speed on all your other legendary items. Then what we will go for next is actually something that was changed as well. We will go for Bloodthirster this time. And this is important because if we sort by crit chance, you actually like viable options here are not too bad, because obviously this is useless on Yasuo. This is fine on Yone, and this slot is actually like something where you can go for Navaric Quick Blades instead if you want to. But generally, I think, since another thing I didn't talk about earlier was that Conquerors was actually nerfed quite heavily on the healing. It is almost down to half from what it was before. It gives you a bit more adaptive force, but the healing is down quite a lot. And especially now, since I can show you the sad part, we only have 80% crit chance with 2 complete items. This helps us with that by, in the other build, going for Shield Bow, and in this build going for Bloodthirster. And that way we actually get some lifesteal as well. But the problem with this build is this: we only have 1.6 second cooldown. It's still like, it's fine. It's nothing like horrible, but it's still like, it's not the best. And then another part, like, I forgot about this. Another good part about this build, although I do still think like the other one is generally better, is because of this attack speed buff. We can actually go for Bloodthirster and we still get a bit of attack speed when we finish it. But the problem with this build is, like, even with these items, you're still really weak. This build scales really well, but you're still like extremely weak at 2 items. So, but one thing that's good about this build is it gives you flexibility, because unlike with Shield Bow where you actually spend your lifeline on that, this opens you up to building Stair Axe, which I generally wouldn't recommend, but Maw is a good one if you are facing heavy magic damage. In general, it's still a pretty niche item and not the best, but it opens it up for you, since they actually changed, I think it's relevant to talk about it, but they actually changed Death's Dance to now not worry about magic damage at all, plus it doesn't heal you unless you get kills. So this is definitely not an early game item or a rush item anymore. And Maw is fine, but this opens you up to building more with its lifeline. But once again, this one is pretty weak at 2 items. So then finally, when we finish our IE, we get another 10% attack speed from that, and then with levels we're gonna be capping our QCD. So it's still fine. I do think that this build's greatest, what's the best about this build is its flexibility, which we will see like in a little bit. But I do think like in general, if you're just building for like general purpose, you want to go for the previous build. But once again, I recommend you to actually try out stuff for yourself, see what works. These are just templates that I think will really help. So anyway, these are the 2 builds. Here you can see the same stuff. These are the 2 core builds, so both of them I left the 2 slots open, because those will be obviously stuff that you need for the current match. And then since I have terrible memory, let me see actually what those are just, personally I think the first one is better, but the second one can work. It's just insanely weak before 3 items. Yeah, that's what I already talked about, because like at Kraken, which is obviously it deals true damage, so it's still like it becomes more and more useful as the match goes on. But another good part about that and going for BT second is because the true damage actually scales with your AD as well, and BT actually gives you a decent chunk of AD. It's still fine. But then, like other 2 slots here, I talk about the items I generally think are the best. So, Silvermere Dawn, which is the new different version of I forgot, Mercurial Scimitar. I will touch on this versus Mercurial Scimitar a bit later. Death's Dance, obviously only versus physical damage, and I do think that, like I say here, Guardian Angel, even like no matter what the enemy team comp is, you usually would rather take GA instead of Death's Dance, unless you're absolutely positive that you can just steamroll the opponent that you would never die. Wit's End, this I talk about a bit like later as well, but this is something that I do not think you should build on Yone. I think Yone doesn't benefit like as much from attack speed as Yasuo, especially beyond after capping the attack speed. So I do think that in general, if you're facing heavy magic damage, you should not go for this, and you should instead go for just the no lifeline build and then build more. But once again, it's up to personal preference. If you like it, go for it. And if you're facing literally 5 magic damage dealers with nothing but magic damage in their kit, then it might work out for you. But no, just note, Wit's End lost the healing as well, so it's much weaker than it was before. Then GA, and then another new item, Chempong Chainsword. We will also touch on this a bit later. It is an alternative to Immortal Reminder, which actually now is a viable option on these champions because it doesn't give you armor pen anymore, which is kind of wasted. But Silvermere Dawn and Chempong Chainsword we will touch on a bit later. But like I said, Death's Dance, usually to finish your build, or sometimes as the 5th one if you're super fed. Wit's End generally only on Yasuo in specific matchups, and then GA is always basically good. So now I will touch on the Immortal Reminder and Mercurial Scimitar. So my thoughts as I was writing this, also changed a little bit. So I say why it doesn't work. It works, but it's very niche. So I will touch on that a little bit later. So first things first, like I mentioned earlier, first slot after Berserker needs to give you as much attack speed possible. So for the PD build, it's obviously PD because 40% is really good value. And if you want to instead go for Kraken Slayer as your mythic, and you want to go that route, you need the attack speed buff, mythic buff from it, so that's Kraken Slayer. So it's basically only a debate between those two. And then the second slot needs to fill your sustain. This I touched on. This is something that can be flexible if you'd like, but I do think generally you want to have sustain on your second slot, especially since we lost the PD shield, which is big, and Conquerors was also nerfed. That's like the total loss of sustain and survivability is a really big chunk when you add those both together. So like I say here, Conquerors was nerfed, and if you don't go for a shield bow, you want BT. Or if you went for shield bow, you want BT since your mythic slot is already filled. But like I say here, it loses an attack speed, which is why generally the PD into shield bow build is better in my opinion. But like I said, we'll touch on it a bit later, thanks to flexibility. And then third slot, like I say, there's obviously on champions that they go for crit, they go for 100% crit. There is nothing to compete with IE here. It's not even a debate. And here I mentioned how everything above applies to Yone, except having Wit's End. Actually, I just realized how small actually the text is, but I read everything out loud, so I don't think it matters. But it looks actually quite on that, and I don't feel like zooming. I'll just do this so you can read this if you want to. So Wit's End, like I say here, it's basically not a thing you ever want on Yone. And like I say here, I'm just repeating myself, but like I say here, I recommend going for the second build and just building more. And then we touch on the Mercurial Scimitar, which is mainly the same, but I will mention how they changed versus Silvermane Dawn, which is the new one, and then Mortal Remedy versus Chambok. So I listed the new ones before, because I do think if you just want one stable build, then just go for the new ones, because in general they will be better, but there's more of a case with Chempunk than there is with Silvermane Dawn, since Merc Scimitar is really bad, as we'll find out. Okay, not really bad, but it's much worse than Silvermane in this scenario. So anyways, first things first, here I talk about the context. So it's important to know that on Yasuo and Yone, you get extra AD per excess crit. It's not much, but it's honest work, but it'll matter in some scenarios. So just take this into account. So first things first, the Simi versus Silvermane. So these are the two QSS items, so very relevant in a lot of scenario, but like I say here, it's not going to be close. So this is where I ignore the crit part and I just transform it into 80. So Simi actually gives you 20% crit chance and 30-80, but with Yasuo and Yone at this point, it's gonna be 40-80 instead. So Simi will be 40-80 and 30 MR, and Silvermane Dawn is 35-80, 5 more MR, and then 200 HP. And both have the same active with 90-second cooldown. So what is the breaking point? Well, first of all, we just look at the stats. You lose 5 AD, you gain 5 MR. That alone wouldn't be worth it, but then 200 HP on top. That's already better. And then if we go look at the active item and what they actually do after cleansing, Merc gives you one move speed, I think it was 70. Like, no matter what, how much it was, like, it's not relevant really enough to get 1 second of extra move speed instead of getting this out of Silvermere, which is 40% tenacity and slow resist for triple the duration. Since if you're cleansing CC, you're probably facing CC, where obviously tenacity and slow resistance will do more for you. So like I talk about it here, unless you're facing a scenario where the opponent literally has a single ability and the champion doing that to you has no other CC, like TFW, it's always better to go for Silvermere. Because like here's the stat difference and the passive is generally better. Because even when it's stuff like Skarner or Malzahar that suppress you, they do also have other CC, they have slows, and it's much more beneficial for you to get the tenacity. And even in scenarios where it's just TF, like both Yone and Yasuo do well against TF, especially since with Yasuo you have Windwall, you have nothing else to Windwall than his gold card. So it's more of a waste. So even in scenarios, I actually talk about it here, but yeah, even in scenarios where in the matchup the Mercurial would win out, it's such a small margin that I don't think it's even worth considering. But keep in mind, if they ever buff the like compensation buff for Yasuo and Yone, like the bonus AD from excess crit, if they ever buff it to be like double, so 1 per 1, then that means you actually get more AD, much more AD from Mercurial, where it might win out in some matchups, but even then it's more like survivability versus damage. So in general, like I wouldn't even worry about Mercurial Scimitar, and anytime you need QSS, except for one scenario, which I will talk about in the very end, you always want to go full Silvermere. Then the other scenario, where it's Mortal Reminder versus Chempunk Chainsword, it actually gets much more interesting. So the stats with the crit passive considered is Mortal Reminder gives you 30-80, it would be 20, 25% attack speed, and then 7% movement speed. And Chempunk Sword gives you 45 AD, 200 HP again, and then 15 ability haste. This is just rework CDR to make sure that it's always as useful, because CDR was obviously more useful the more you get it. So in this, the passive, which in both is like dealing physical damage, applies 40% grievous wounds, or grievous wounds that remove healing by 40%. And the way grievous wounds now work is there are scenarios where it gets buffed to 60%. And in Mortal Reminder's case, if you attack the same target 3 times, it gets buffed to 60%, and Chempunk is just dealing damage to a target under half HP. So these are both easy to do. MR is obviously against a super tank, you can apply it before, but if you do a lot of burst damage, you will get it sooner with Chempunk. So this is like, it's a really close one, and in this scenario or case, it definitely isn't about the actives. And instead, we take a look at the stats. So the breaking point becomes like more the attack plus move speed versus ability haste and HP. So generally it's like, what do you need? But obviously Yasuo benefits less from ability haste, since he only has 2 abilities, one of which is extremely short cooldown anyway, his ult. So he doesn't really benefit from ability haste at all, since the other 2 abilities are just about your attack speed. So on Yone, it's the argument is more relevant, like which do you need for the scenario. But then when we go into my suggestions, in general, if you're going with my builds that I showcased earlier, you should go for Mortal with build number 1, and Chempunk if you're going for build number 2. So that means like the PD into Shield Bow into IE, you want to go for Mortal Reminder then, if you need Grievous Wound for that game. And the other one, when you go for Kraken into BT into IE, you then want to go into Chempunk if you need Grievous Wounds. This will have another scenario later on. And then here, like breakpoint scenario where you always want mortal is on Yasuo if you go for Wits End, because in that case you're dealing less damage per attack, but you are attacking extremely quickly. So no matter which build you go for, if you go for Wits End on Yasuo, then you should go for Mortal Reminder. Mortal Reminder in general is better on Yasuo than the other one, like if we just think about them in vacuum, but on top having the extra attack speed here as well makes it that you can almost immediately make it 60%. And then for some closing thoughts and some other scenarios. So we're now talking about the extreme scenario where you would need a QSS or a Grievous Wounds effect before you finish your full crit, meaning that you basically need to replace an item in the build. And then, like I mentioned here, in these scenarios, go for the build number 2, which is the Kraken Slayer. And then you let go of the sustain from the BT, and you replace that with the item you need accordingly that gives you crit. The reason why we do this instead of the other one is that because of Kraken Slayer's passive, we still get attack speed, so we're still like moving towards our Q cooldown cap and actually making it like usable. So if we went for Shield Bow and then we went for Mercurial Scimitar or Immortal Reminder, then we would be like super screwed on attack speed. And I will touch on this as well, but a Mortal Reminder as a replacement is actually fine. It gives you attack speed, so it actually, like with Kraken, it actually caps with Berserkers, Kraken, and Mortal Reminder, you actually manage to cap your QCD with those. But with the Shield Bow scenario, it won't be as close, but I do think like it's still a build worth considering, although I don't mention it here. It's still a build worth considering because I talk a little bit later in this, I talk about how the problem with the Kraken into Mortal into IE build is that although it caps Q effectively, it gets the crit that you want and it actually gives you decent stats. You're lacking any defensive options whatsoever. You don't have any sustain from the build, and you also do not have any sort of shield. So that's the reason why I think you might want to consider going for Shield Bow. And in that case, obviously, you would want to go for Shield Bow and then Mortal Reminder and then IE. But if you're confident, I think the objectively best build for scenarios like where you need the Grievous Wounds early is the Kraken into Mortal Reminder. But obviously the only real relevant matchup where this applies is versus Vladimir. And if you're good, you can beat Vladimir even with the basic build. But this is obviously just like where we want to go in depth. So it's like, that's why I wanted to touch on this. But in general, you should never find yourself in a scenario where you need the QSS before finishing your crit. Because you need to then go for the Mercurial Scimitar, which kind of kills your build there, and it makes the build that was already bad early even worse, since Mercurial doesn't give you any lifesteal anymore. And then you're just stuck being super weak with that one defensive tool being the cleanse. So it's like, it's just really bad if you have to ever find yourself in a scenario where you absolutely need that. So let's say like you're playing Yone and the enemy TF just absolutely curb stomped you, and if you can't cleanse the W, you're just dead. But in that scenario, I think you're screwed anyway. So it's like, you should never do this. But like I said, the Mortal Reminder second in place of BT is fine, and I recommend you to test out both the mythics to see which one you want to go for before Mortal Reminder. just to know what you like, because like I said, the comfier one is the Shield Bow into Mortal Reminder, because you actually have sustain and you have defensive tools then as well. You're just lacking in attack speed a little bit, and the objectively better one is the Kraken into Mortal Reminder, but it's extremely aggressive and extremely glass cannony, and it's hard to make it work, so you definitely need to be like confident in your Yasuo and Yone. But in general, I also talked about it here, but I think in general Yasuo and Yone will feel weaker than they did before, because you come online at 3 items, or maybe 2.5 items, instead of 3 items like you did before. Instead of 2 items like you did before. And the compensation for it being the very minor amount of bonus AD is not really worth it, in my opinion. But how the items work and function, your hypercarry potential and your late game power will actually be even greater than before. So it's just more about utilizing your tools early game to actually get to your powerful spot earlier. In general, like, I like the preseason, I like the changes, I think this makes it more interesting, but I do think that, especially looking at Katarina's compensation, where she actually scales off attack speed now, and she gets like on-hit effects on her, on almost all of her abilities, is kind of crazy to look at that. And then in contrast to Yone and Yasuo having delayed power spike by 1 item, and additionally just getting much less payoff. So that I don't like too much, but I think this makes it interesting. I hope this was somewhat helpful and this was fun to make. I always love theory crafting and trying out stuff like this, so hopefully it helps at least some of you out there, and definitely let me know if you have any other builds or you have some thoughts about any of these builds. Definitely let me know down below in the comments, and let's see if we can actually make some really good builds together like this. So anyways, thanks for watching, y'all. This has been WeFox. Wow, it was over half an hour. But yeah, I'll definitely do timestamps, and anyways, I will see you all next time. Peace out and good luck on the Rift and in the preseason, everyone.